The modern patriarchy, it isn't actually built on confidence or power or even strength.
Right, it's really not.
Yeah, according to deep Jungian psychology, it's actually built entirely on the terror of little boys who are, desperately afraid of their mothers.
Which is just a wild concept to wrap your head around.
It really is. Welcome to the deep dive. Our mission today is to move far beyond those superficial gender debates we see every day on our feeds. We want to explore a profoundly hidden, almost awe-inspiring psychological landscape.
Absolutely.
We're deconstructing the esoteric architecture of men.
And to anchor this exploration, we're drawing from a really seminal work by the Jungian analyst James Hollis. It's called Under Saturn's Shadow, the Wounding and Healing of Men.
Such a powerful title.
It is. And it's this intense philosophical mapping of the mythic forces that actually govern modern masculinity. Like,
Right.
we aren't just looking at cultural symptoms here. We're looking at the root existential realities.
Okay, let's unpack this counterintuitive hook right away, starting with that title.
Hmm.
I mean, who is Saturn, and what does it mean to live under his shadow?
So to really grasp this, we have to step into the mythological framework. Saturn, or Cronus in the older Greek myths, was the god who famously devoured his own children.
Wait, the god who ate his kids?
Yeah, exactly. But he didn't eat them out of malice, necessarily. It was out of pure paranoia. He was absolutely terrified that if they grew up, they would usurp his power.
Wow.
And Hollis uses this ancient image to make a staggering claim about our modern world. He says the patriarchy as we know it is exactly this. It is a Saturnian shadow.
So it's not this, offensive system designed to boldly conquer. It's a defensive system built on paranoia.
Right. It's a complete corruption of empowerment. The Saturnian legacy is this crushing, invisible weight of roles, expectations, and, ruthless competition.
Just devouring men.
Exactly. It devours the souls of men in a desperate, fear-driven attempt to maintain control. It's a system built by people who are terrified of losing their grip.
That completely flips the entire cultural script. But if we want to understand where that foundational fear comes from, we have to go back to the very beginning of human consciousness.
We do.
And this is where the esoteric psychology gets really fascinating. It starts with what Jungians call the mother complex and the trauma of existential separation.
Right. Think about the reality of human development. Human consciousness begins with the ultimate trauma, the trauma of birth.
Yeah.
Because before birth, in the womb, a developing child is entirely connected to the Great Mother. Esoterically speaking, you are quite literally connected to the heartbeat of the cosmos.
Floating in perfect safety.
Exactly. You're in this fluid safety where every single need is met instantly. There's no duality. There's no you and me. There's just oneness.
But then you're born, you are physically severed from that oneness. And from that moment on, Hollis argues, men specifically are forced into this bizarre psychological unnaturalness.
Yeah, to become a man in our society, a boy is expected to artificially separate from the natural world.
Right, the world of instinct and emotion and the mother.
Yes, and cross over into the man-made artificial world of culture and commerce. They have to violently rip themselves away from the feminine to prove their masculinity.
Which creates a devastating, lifelong existential contradiction. Because on one hand, deep in the unconscious, men harbor this deadly longing to return to the safety of the womb, back to the Great Mother.
It's a profound exhaustion with the demands of the world. They just want to be taken care of.
But simultaneously, because their fragile masculine identity relies entirely on being separate from her, they harbor a mortal terror of being swallowed up by that dependency.
Which is the core conflict.
But hold on, what about the rugged Marlboro man archetype? The ultimate individualist, the lone wolf chopping wood in the mountains who needs absolutely no one. Are we saying that guy is actually the one most terrified of his own internal feminine?
It's a complete paradox, but yes. Yeah, the guy who isolates himself in the mountains isn't necessarily self-sufficient. He might just be building the thickest, most impenetrable fortress possible against his own vulnerability.
Wow.
His extreme ruggedness is an extreme defense mechanism against the pull of the mother complex.
There is a brilliant analogy in the book that visualizes this. The conscious male ego is described as a thin wafer floating on an immense ocean of the unconscious.
What's fascinating here is how fragile that is.
Yeah, you've got this tiny, fragile crust of identity, the part of a man that says, I am strong, I am in control, and it is just constantly terrified of dissolving and drowning in those deep, dark waters of the mother complex beneath it.
And if we look at how that internal terror manifests externally, things start to make a lot of sense. Because a man is severed from his own inner soul, his anima or his inner feminine, He projects that immense, terrifying inner mother image onto the actual women in his life.
So when he's reacting to his partner, he's not actually reacting to the woman sitting across the table from him.
Rarely. I mean, he is reacting to an archetype. Men generally deal with this massive unconscious projection in a few predictable ways.
Like trying to control them.
Right, they might try to ruthlessly control women to neutralize the perceived threat of being engulfed. Or they might avoid women entirely, retreating into chronic bachelorhood.
Or they expect the impossible.
Exactly. Very commonly, they expect their partner to provide cosmic nurturance, to essentially be the great mother, anticipate all their emotional needs, and heal their existential wound.
And when a mortal, flesh and blood woman inevitably fails to be a cosmic deity, the man feels betrayed. He erupts in anger, or he withdraws into silence.
Because he was looking for a savior, not a partner.
He totally alienates himself from true connection, and that inner reality, that fragile wafer on a terrifying ocean, dictates how men survive in the outer world. I mean, if you are secretly terrified of drowning, how do you survive an ordinary Tuesday at the office?
You have to cover it up.
Which brings us to the first major paradigm-shifting reality of modern manhood from the text, the conspiracy of silence and the rule by fear.
It's so pervasive.
If you ask most guys what drives them, they'll say ambition, logic, a desire to provide. But the foundational claim here is that men's lives are fundamentally governed by fear.
Fear is the invisible architect. But because there is immense, paralyzing shame attached to that fear, men collude in a conspiracy of silence. They subconsciously agree never to talk about it.
You see this conditioning start so young. Think about the locker room slogans we all grew up with. No pain, no gain. Boys don't cry. Walk it off.
The fear of being a sissy.
Exactly. There is this primal, deep-seated terror of being perceived as weak. And what that does is force boys, and eventually men, to swallow humiliation whole. They build up these massive walls to isolate themselves.
Even if they're surrounded by people.
Right. They might have a dozen buddies they play golf with or grab a beer with, but they will never actually talk about their shame or their fear because they are terrified of being unmasked.
They are living in a state of meaningless wounding, which introduces the second major concept we need to explore, the vital necessity of meaningful wounding and the missing rites of passage.
Right, because that pull to the mother is so strong.
We talked about how strong that mother complex is, that gravitational pull toward the safety of the womb. A boy won't just voluntarily walk away from that comfort. It has to be severed.
In ancestral cultures, they understood the psychological gravity. They used intense, prolonged rites of passage. The boy literally had to experience a psychological death to his childhood dependency so he could be reborn as an adult.
The transition couldn't just be a polite conversation. It had to be visceral. You look at the myth of Iron John, where a boy has to steal the key from under his mother's pillow, leave the safety of his parents' castle, and go deep into the wild to discover his true masculine energy.
Or look at the very real rituals of the Australian Aborigines. That Aboriginal ritual is so striking.
It's incredibly intense.
The tribal elders take the teenage boy away from the women of the tribe. They sit in a circle in the dirt, take sharp stones, and cut their own forearms. They bleed into a bowl, and they pass that bowl to the boy to drink. And they tell him, "Mother's milk nourished you, now father's blood nourishes you."
Just think about the psychological impact of that moment. Through sheer physical and emotional intensity, the boy is shown that he is no longer a child. The bridge back to the mother's comfort is burned to ashes, but a new, unbreakable bridge to the fathers, to the lineage of men, is built.
He belongs.
Yes, he belongs. He is initiated. But the profound tragedy of our current era is that those wise elders are gone.
The bridge is washed out.
Completely washed out.
Yeah.
The elders who are supposed to be waiting on the other side of the river to pull these boys across are either dead, deeply depressed themselves, or they are lost in corporate boardrooms chasing quarterly profits.
There is no one there to say, "I see you, and you have what it takes."
And without those sacred rites, without that initiation, we arrive at a really challenging concept, violence as a symptom of a violated soul.
This is the third big idea.
Right. The premise is that because there is no meaningful initiation, men are wounded meaninglessly by the expectations of society. The phrase Hollis uses is, men's lives are violent because their souls have been violated.
But hold on. Isn't a job sometimes just a job? I'm having a hard time believing that a guy putting on a suit, commuting to an office, and paying his mortgage is experiencing some profound violation of the soul. Millions of men do it every day.
To understand the violation, we have to look at how we define human value. The author quotes Franz Kafka, who brilliantly pointed out that modern bureaucratic and corporate structures treat men as expendable mechanisms.
Like literal machines.
Exactly. A machine doesn't have a soul. It has a function. It produces a measurable output. From the moment a boy enters school, he is often conditioned to believe that his only inherent value is his productivity, his ability to perform, protect, and provide.
So his inner life doesn't matter.
His rich, chaotic inner life, his soul, is completely ignored or actively suppressed because it doesn't serve the economic machine.
So he literally becomes an economic unit, just a gear turning in a machine.
Yes. And when a human being, a creature of nature and spirit, is treated merely as a mechanism, it is a profound violation of nature. And here is the psychological reality. The energy of the soul doesn't just evaporate when it's ignored.
Where does it go?
It goes underground, it ferments, and inevitably it erupts. It erupts inward as heavy, unexplainable depression, or it erupts outward as violence.
Wow.
If you trace the tragic phenomena of our modern world, from the frustrated employee who suddenly goes berserk, all the way to the epidemic of male suicide, you find this root cause. You find a completely uninitiated, violated soul screaming for some kind of meaning.
If you map these esoteric ideas onto our modern landscape, it explains so much of the quiet desperation you see everywhere. Modern society essentially forces men to function entirely at what Jungians call the persona level.
The mask they present to the world.
Exactly, the persona is the job title. It's the salary, the model of the car in the driveway, the square footage of the home, the social status of the country club. We've built an entire culture around measuring the mask while completely ignoring the face underneath it.
To really drive this home, Hollis brings in a powerful piece of medieval mythology, the myth of Amfortas, the wounded fisher king.
I love this myth.
It's so relevant. In the legend, Amfortas is the ruler of the wasteland. He's the king, but he has suffered a terrible, agonizing wound in the groin. Symbolically, the groin represents his place of generativity, his core maleness, his vital energy.
And he can't heal it.
Right. The tragedy of Amfortas is that despite all his wealth and power, his wound will not heal. No doctor can fix it. It can only be healed by the Holy Grail, which in Jungian terms is the ultimate symbol for the container of the soul.
Here's where it gets really interesting. If you're wondering why this mythological stuff matters to your life right now, think about the modern equivalence of Amfortas. Think about the guy who seems to have it all.
The guy with the corner office.
Yeah. He has the magnificent castle, the beautiful house in the suburbs. He has the big car in the garage, the trophies of corporate success mounted on his walls. But inside, he is nervously pacing the ramparts of that castle at 3 a.m.
He's terrified.
He has the entire kingdom, but he carries a secret bleeding wound that just will not heal. Because somewhere along the way, he traded his soul to get the castle.
We see the symptoms of that bleeding wound everywhere. For instance, the structural lack of initiation fuels the way our society drastically overvalues sexuality.
Right, using sex not for true intimate connection, but as a desperate bid for what the author calls redemption.
Think about the isolation we've discussed. Men are cut off from their own emotions. They are alienated from true brotherhood with other men, and they are starved of non-sexual physical touch.
So they project it all.
Yes, they project all of that pent-up need for comfort, salvation, and validation onto their romantic partners. It's the mother complex rising up again. They aren't looking for a lover. They are looking for a savior to momentarily make the existential dread go away.
It perfectly explains the tragedy of the organization man. You know, the guy who follows all the rules, works 80 hours a week, does everything the Saturnian system asked of him, but then suddenly erupts in blind rage at his family over a spilled glass of water.
Or he blows up his life with a reckless affair.
Why? Because he obeyed the rules of the patriarchy, but he is starving to death inside.
So the question becomes, if society is a reflection of this unhealed, festering wound, how do we break the cycle? If Saturn is still eating his children, how do we stop him?
The trajectory here is fascinating because it doesn't rely on the outside world fixing itself. The reality is, the tribal elders are gone. There is no magical group of wise men waiting in the woods to initiate us. So men must activate from within what they did not receive from without.
Healing has to be homeopathic.
Let's clarify that mechanism because it's crucial. In medicine, homeopathy is the idea that cures, you use a tiny microscopic dose of the venom to cure the bite. How does that translate psychologically?
Psychologically, it means looking at the nature of the wound. The wound of modern men happened in isolation, in the absence of fathers and elders. Therefore, the healing has to start in isolation.
You can't outsource it.
Exactly. You cannot look to an institution, a corporation, or even a romantic partner to heal you. You have to become the very thing you are missing. Men have to learn to parent themselves. They have to become their own inner elders.
And that casts a really striking vision for the future, especially in today's highly polarized climate. A lot of people think the answer is a massive, organized political men's movement. Let's get all the guys together and fight the system.
But Hollis argues the exact opposite.
He quotes Carl Jung, right? Who warned that collective groups usually just reflect the unconsciousness of their individual members.
It's a profound warning. If you put 1,000 unhealed, terrified men in a stadium together, you don't get a revolution of consciousness. You just get a much louder, unhealed wound.
You get a mob.
You get a mob driven by the same Saturnian fear. The true revolution is an intensely private, individual awakening. It is the hero's journey internalized. The battle isn't out there against some cultural villain. It's in the private smithy of the soul.
And there's a practical architecture to that internal revolution. It involves some deeply counterintuitive steps. First, it requires actually acknowledging the grief. Men must grieve the loss of the fathers. They have to allow themselves to feel the sadness of not being initiated rather than just toughing it out.
And then they have to break the conspiracy of silence. They have to tell their secrets, ideally to other men, and dismantle the shame that keeps them isolated.
Which leads to perhaps the most challenging and crucial step-risking loving other men. Platonically, brotherly love. Why is that specific bond the antidote to the Saturnian fear?
Because under the shadow of Saturn, other men are exclusively viewed as competitors. They are threats to your status, or they are judges waiting to call you weak.
Always keeping score.
Always. Furthermore, homophobia, both conscious and unconscious, keeps men terrified of expressing genuine affection for one another. Breaking through that competitive, homophobic fear to forge true, vulnerable brotherhood is the exact opposite of Saturnian isolation. It proves that you don't have to be a lone mechanism to survive.
And from that place of brotherhood, you can seek mentors. And just as importantly, you can mentor others. You become the elder that you desperately needed when you were younger. You take responsibility for your own psychology, and you recover your own soul's journey, completely independent of what the corporate ladder or societal expectations demand of you.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, think about the staggering implications of that private revolution. When a single man manages to step out of Saturn's shadow and heal that frightened child inside him, the ripple effects are enormous.
He stops projecting.
Yes. He ceases to be a psychic burden on the women in his life because he's no longer demanding they play the great mother and regulate his emotions.
He stops treating his own body and the earth itself as expendable mechanisms for material gain.
Exactly. And most importantly, he breaks the cycle for the next generation. He stops eating his children. He becomes an elder who can build a bridge for the boys coming up behind him.
It's an incredibly profound journey we've been on today. We started by looking at the terrifying power of the mother complex, that deep, unconscious longing for oneness that makes a man build a fortress of rugged isolation.
Just to protect himself.
Yeah. We saw how that fear allowed the defensive shadow of Saturn to take over, forcing men into these restrictive, soul-crushing roles governed by a conspiracy of silence. We explored the tragic reality of Kafka's mechanism, the uninitiated souls erupting in violence or depression.
The Fisher King.
And finally, we followed the path of Amfortas, the wounded Fisher King, realizing that the only way to heal the uninitiated soul is to turn inward, to become our own elders, and embark on the internal quest for the Grail.
It demands an immense amount of courage. To stop blaming the outer world, to stop chasing the external trophies, and to confront the vast ocean of the unconscious within.
It really does. Which leaves us with a final lingering thought to explore for yourself. If the toxic patriarchal structures of our world are not actually the result of confident male strength and ballast, but are in fact the overcompensated defense mechanisms of terrified, uninitiated boys who are secretly longing for the safety of their mothers, then dismantling those structures isn't about defeating a powerful enemy, it's about figuring out how to heal a frightened child. How does that perspective shift change the way you look at the men in your life, or, the man in the mirror?